Hello. Welcome, everybody, as they're coming on. I am going to try to put everybody on mute so we can, but if you can go ahead and put yourself on mute, that would also be helpful. Oh, here we go. I got it. Okay, so since I've muted the audio so we can keep the sound quality nice and clear, there is a group chat window at the bottom of your screen. It says chat, and so that is the first best way of being in touch with me. Anyway, we're still a couple minutes before start time, but I'm Margaret, and thank you, early birds, for coming and for donating. And hi, Roger and Gail.
Hi.
Let's see, Roger, are you muted there? I haven't heard your voice yet. There we go. There we go. We got it.
You got?
Yep. Hi, Roger.
Hi. How are you doing?
Good. I'm really looking forward to this call. So I think maybe we'll give it a couple more minutes for people to join before we kind of dive in. Yeah, so welcome. Like 1 minute left, let's say. Is Kat on the call? Gail, do you?
I don't know. I'm just seeing the big phone sign right now.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. And I see Claire. Welcome, Claire, from the fundraising team. Yeah, okay, so about 80 people RSVP'd for this call, but there's only 20 people on the call currently, which makes me somewhat worried about people having technical problems. But it's hard. But anyway, it's hard to know. So I will. I think we can go ahead and get started, and hopefully more people will join, and I'll go and check and see if people have emailed in regarding technical difficulties. Anyway, so welcome, donors of Extinction Rebellion. This is a first ever donor debrief call. I'm Margaret Klein Salamon. I'm the interim fundraising director for Extinction Rebellion. I'm also the director of an organization called the Climate Mobilization. You can see in my back, in the back of my screen here, those are my two loves, the Climate Mobilization and Extinction Rebellion. And so I've been helping Extinction Rebellion with their crowdfunding, and as you guys may or may not know, that's raised almost £100,000. and that's you know, that's a lot of money. And so this call is to say thank you to the donors who made that possible, and to give you all some kind of an inside look at what Extinction Rebellion is doing and how it got to be what it is, and yeah, and potentially kind of grow into you know, a larger and more regular, I would like kind of donor engagement. You know, hopefully this will be the first kind of call like this, and we'll have more. And so anyway, but it's yeah, I'm just thrilled to be here and to be connecting you all, the donors who helped make this you know, big crowdfunding success possible, with Roger and Gail, who are some of the founders and kind of core organizers and visionaries of Extinction Rebellion. And so I have a bunch of questions for Roger and Gail that I'm going to ask them kind of in an interview format. I expect you all on the line have some questions yourself, which you can put in the chat. And I've got some questions, and then we'll move into donor questions towards the second half of the call. But you can feel free to add them now, but we'll get to them in at that point. So yeah, so if we could kick off, Gail and Roger, could you just introduce yourself and yeah, check in?
Yeah, so hi, so I'm Gail Bradbrook, and live in Stroud in Gloucestershire, and I'm from Yorkshire.
Hello.
Hi, Gail. Thank you.
Hi.
Roger?
Yeah, yeah, my name's Roger Hallam. I do research at King's College in London on radical and progressive political change, how to make it effective. I've got a background in social movement organising. I've got an organic farm in Wales, which is where I'm at the moment, which is very nice to get away from London. And yeah, thank you very much, everyone, for coming.
So yeah, so Roger and Gail, you know, you guys are so modest, and the culture of XRs in general, it's so like egoless. But so I'm gonna just add to their self-introductions that they, you know, they have built this organization, Rising Up, that has then taken on the XR campaign, which has really kind of shaken up the, I mean, the global climate movement. I would say. So yeah, Gail and Roger, could you tell us about that? Could you tell us about creating Rising Up and kind of how that got started?
Sure. So Rising Up was formed in 2016. Roger and I didn't know each other. I think we'd met each other vaguely on some network from the New Economics Foundation, and we were both more sort of radical people on there, I suppose. We were both trying out different methodologies. Roger was doing something at University College London to do with rent strikes and using a process called conditional commitment. And I'd actually built a platform for conditional commitment, which is like, I'll do something if you'll do it as well. So I'd started something called Compassionate Revolution. And Roger was going around meeting radical groups, and I was going around trying to get something off the ground. And to cut a bit of a long story short there, we met up in April 2016 and started having meetings with other people to say, you know, we need a strategy in this area. What we're not winning, things are getting worse. What do we need to do? And so we went through a period of consultation, talking to different groups like Earth First, Plain Stupid, Reclaim the Power, people from Occupy, Democracy, and so on, just whoever would listen to us, I think. various meetings and started writing a strategy document to launch something in November 2016. So it was off the back of some aviation campaigning by a group called Reclaim the Power. I'll sort of speak for myself here, but I think one of the things you do when you're trying lots of things is you fail often. I've read that about social entrepreneurs. So you try things out and often they don't work. So the first thing we tried was supposed to have 100 people arrested at Heathrow Airport. I think there were 13 or 15 or something. But it was it was the starting point. We followed it up in the February with another action at Heathrow Airport, which showed us that this fear that can be in activism around repeat arrests was not something that necessarily had to be so worried about when you had the moral force behind you, I guess, when you were essentially correct about what you were saying. And because Rising Up was set under holacratic principles, we did some of the basics like getting databases together and websites and branding and all that kind of stuff. But we, between us as a group, as people joined us, different things were tried. So there was actions in London around paying inequality called Life Not Money at the London School of Economics that Roger led. I was doing stuff around toxic banking and fracking. We did things with Land Justice Network, with Disabled People Against Cuts. We tried lots of different things to test out tactics, and in that way I guess we built a team, and between us the team built some trust, and we met relatively regularly in gatherings and meetings, and Roger tabled the idea for Extinction Rebellion. It wasn't called that then, but you know, the basic idea of it in January this year.
Can I get a clarification? So when you were starting out, you were doing these actions to learn and to test out tactics because there was already the idea of a bigger campaign?
Oh yeah. I mean, but both of us know that, you know, all of these things are interconnected. I mean, without getting into our own personal political views and spiritual views, but things are interconnected, and so which tactics work and how do you do things like momentum driven organizing. We had some training around that from Carlos Saavedra in the States at the INE Institute. I mean, in saying that we were testing things out, the things that we all care about deeply, but I think one of the things is that when you watch a lot of front lines open up, so in Stroud in Gloucestershire, there's an incinerator that they're building, which is mental. The fracking sites have been expanding in the UK, and they've been subject to legal mechanisms to keep activists away, injunctions and so on. Heathrow Airport got given the go-ahead, and you know, it goes on and on. What you're doing is watching all these front lines open up in both social and economic and environmental justice, and knowing from you know, all through this time, all of us were reading many books, and I do say that, like, as a movement, at the heart of it, there's essentially some nerds that really like
yes.
data. Yeah, we really like data. We like reading stuff, getting training, thinking about things. But it's also important to build trust with each other, isn't it? You know, we're quite maverick between us, and understand what our strengths and weaknesses are and how we work as a group and so on. So yeah, that was the process. But the idea was always that the system has to change. You know, the system is killing us. There are 6 people in the world that have the same wealth as the bottom 50% of the world. It just, by most people's measures, it's madness, and it has to change. And whether you spend a lot of time thinking about homelessness or the environment or disabled people's rights or poverty or whatever it is, you know that there's some fundamental structural issues that have got to go. And so the question, I guess, that united Roger and I from the start was, how do you get a social movement that's effective? You know, what worked in the past, and what can we bring in that's different this time?
And from the very beginning, that there was an awareness of the climate and ecological crisis as kind of core problems, core crises, or something.
Yeah. I mean, I guess you know, taking us back to that January meeting, maybe Roger will talk more about that process getting Extinction Rebellion off the ground. But you know, some of us, including myself, were saying, well, you know, climate change is a symptom of a bigger toxic system, and Gene Sharp says you should work on the pillars of the system, you know, look at the toxic media, the toxic finance system that we have, the fact that the democracy is essentially fake these days. And Roger was saying, yeah, but, you know, we've got to really get our head around this climate change business. You know, just putting forward different proposals and different ideas in meetings about, you know, how to make the big shift.
Awesome. Roger, is there anything you want to add to that about the kind of genesis and early stages of rising up?
I think, I just want to emphasize that this is a sort of research-driven process. It's not a matter of chance, I don't think, that we've been so successful. I think we've been working on this systematically for 2 or 3 years, shifting through the literature and asking some fundamental questions about how progressives and radicals organize and how they define their strategies. And we've come up with a whole bunch of innovations, which I think together have pushed us towards this tipping point and the success that we've had. So I don't think it's altogether unexpected, though obviously it's very welcome. And I think we decided, or at least I argued in January, that the climate crisis and the wider ecological crisis is in a way the trigger point of what's going to create the crisis, which is going to bring about structural change. Because all these things that Gail have said is interconnected, but it seems like the extremity and the gravity of the climate catastrophe, which is evidently in process now, is the thing that might and probably has brought people out on the streets with a determination to make some fundamental changes. So I think it's a combination of those two things, a sort of existential dread, terror, as you might say, of what's happening, which is deeply emotional and ultimately spiritual process, and also a hard-headed look at why progressive movements have failed over the last 30 years to really impact on the trajectories of inequality and inequality of power and corruption in the world.
Awesome. Could you say more about that, or just Rising Up did this research and came up with some important innovations, and has avoided the problems that have hampered progressive movements. Tell me more about that.
Well, I can summarize a few of them. I mean, this isn't necessarily exhaustive, but I think from an organization point of view, one of the major innovations is to have a holacratic structure, which means that we've moved on from large-scale consensus-based organizing, where you have to have a lot of people involved in a lot of decisions. I was a consensus trainer for 10 years, so I'm fully into the notion of consensus, but it evidently doesn't work and hasn't worked when it comes to large-scale organizing. And that doesn't mean we need to go back to an old sort of top-down hierarchical structure. I think what has been innovated, particularly in the States actually, is distributed organizing or holacracy, where you have some basic aims and principles. You spend a lot of time training people in how to work effectively, and then you give people maximum autonomy in their particular groups with their mandates and their roles and responsibilities to get on with it as they have done, as they see fit. And this has been shown many times, and indeed with Extinction Rebellion can facilitate what you might call an ordered, rapid mobilization. So we're all familiar with rapid mobilizations in various historical periods, but as everyone knows, the main problem is they tend to be disordered, and it's not really clear how decisions are made, and they usually end in tears, as it were. So this is a way of combining best of both worlds to have a rapid mobilization, which still has a structure which is participatory and has some accountable means of making decisions. I mean, obviously, in reality, you know, it's quite messy, as everything is in reality, but there's a fundamental change there, I think. And then secondly, as far as the strategy is concerned, I think the big move has been towards recognizing that mass participation, civil disobedience, is historically the most effective way to bring about structural change when you're facing a sort of entrenched power situation. So again, everyone's sort of familiar with the civil rights movement in the United States, where a similar sort of change happened in 1957, I think, when Martin Luther King said, we've done 70 years of trying to persuade the authorities to give black people rights and what have you, and we're going to change the strategy and engage in disruptive and sacrificial mass action, which is going to be enacted in a dignified but, you know, vigorous way. And as everyone knows, over the following 10 years, there was a sea change in the structural position of black people in the American South. So in some ways, we're facing a similar situation now that we've had 30 years of conventional NGO-led activism on climate change, during which time the emissions have gone up globally by 60%. So there's no way of avoiding the fact it's been a catastrophic failure. And what we're basically saying in Extinction Rebellion is, let's try something that's tried and tested. It's been happening many times in the global South, which is, as I say, mass participation, civil disobedience, which is enacted in a respectful way towards the opponent, but with sufficient vigor to bring them to the table. Let's put it like that.
and I think to add to that, what Roger really innovated when he brought his paper to us in January, and we all were like, we don't think we're ready for this, and disagreeing, was the idea of telling the truth and asking people to act accordingly, to act as if that truth is real. And since then, and I think, Roger, I think that was like an instinctive piece from you. I don't think you'd come across Jane Morton's work then, who's a psychologist, who's been saying, why is it that the Green movement isn't, you know, on the whole, talking in such a massive way about how bad things are and asking people to act accordingly? So, you know, you don't say like, you know, we're facing a massive existential threat. Oh, so why don't we all just, like, you know, fly a little bit less and eat less meat, which obviously are two good things to be doing, but it doesn't sort of stack up. You know, you don't say like, you're going to die in 3 months' time, so why don't you just have an extra day off work a week? You know, it's like that kind of incongruence. And so it turns out there have been some people thinking out there about what it means to tell the truth. And it's been a really, I think, interesting process when you've been, you know, giving the talks, and Roger's probably given most of them or more of them than I have. But when you're giving the talk initially, it's like a relief for some people for it to be named so strongly, and for the grief to be allowed and to be welcomed. So there's a psychological element that, you know, another part of social change theory is that people act based on emotion, not based on logic and fact. So acknowledging how frightening this is and how traumatized we all actually are by thinking about this and by living in this system that's fundamentally at odds with the planet, and asking people to act accordingly. I mean, initially my experience of that was that when you sort of said to people, well, you know, getting arrested, I mean, it's not to say getting arrested in itself is a great thing, but, you know, being willing to be disruptive or being willing to do something that shifts society, that you might get arrested, you know, are you willing to do that? At first, a lot of people are looking at you like you've just asked them to do something really terrible and like take a shit in the room or something like that, you know. And but after a while, it's really changed across the UK, the energy around that we've somehow normalized something. And that was always written down in Rising Up's kind of critical success factors, to use that kind of strategic language, that we needed to start normalizing civil disobedience for it not to be this weird thing that you're asking people about. I'm watching two people eat their lunch or something. I don't know how that works, but yeah.
So we've talked about telling the truth about the climate crisis, and I'll just kind of pin onto that, and advocating a solution that could actually protect civilization and the natural world if implemented. We've talked about the strategic value of escalating nonviolent civil disobedience, and we talked about holacracy. I want to ask about regenerative culture and the kind of spiritual piece, because when I was in London, spending time with you guys in the office, I honestly, I would say I've never fit in anywhere better. I felt like, I mean, all these people are so nice and welcoming and driven, you know, they're like here to work and to get stuff done. And I mean, it's really quite an amazing accomplishment to that culture. So I'm wondering if you can speak to how you did that, how that happened.
We were stopping and having a disco every couple of hours as well.
There you go. Yes.
I mean, it's a really strange time, actually, because on the one hand, you know, having wanted to do this for so long and feeling this groundswell of involvement and relief, it's like having the time of your life. At the same time that the grief and the shock and yet more papers are coming out, so it's such a big deal. So for us, I think if you ask any of us in Rising Up or Extinction Rebellion, we'll all have a different take on regenerative culture, and I think there are things written down about it, but it's got different layers to it. And for some of us, there is a spiritual basis to it, a sense of the sacred, but that's not kind of for everybody, and atheists are completely welcome. And actually, I often find atheists who are very morally focused to be some of the most spiritually minded people, actually. It's a sort of funny thing, but I suppose one of the first things is inner work, you know, like, and that was certainly for me a big part of my pathway, and I'll be speaking about it at an event in January, but with the Psychedelic Society. But, you know, how are you sorting your own self out, you know, the places where you might be inhibited or anxious or whatever it is, you know, so you need to be dealing with yourself. And then how do we operate as a community? How do we make sure that our meetings are human and connected? And so we always start with a check-in, so that if you're having a meeting, you know, like, what you bring into that meeting, you know, somebody's mum might be ill, or they might have just had a really bad time, or they might be feeling like really happy or whatever. So just to ground that meeting in the fact that we're human beings, so we have culture like that. We also try and just be quite practical about it. So I think Roger brought this rule in, but one of the things we say is don't call each other out online. You know, don't do that thing of going, "Oh, Margaret did this," you know, like, or Gail did, because, you know, if Margaret and I, which we don't have, by the way, like a problem between us, it'd just be great if we just had a face-to-face or a conversation, had a chat about it. Much more likely to find a resolution, understanding, and some compassion for each other. If you start doing it online and you contage it with everybody else, it really brings the culture down. So that's a really important thing. And we actually, at the start of all our meetings, we remind each other not to do that. And I think also,
so great.
It does really work. I mean, you know, and obviously if you're in a meeting and somebody was behaving really terribly, you'd have to ask them to stop in front of everybody. But generally having that culture of, I call it the don't be a dick rule as well, you know. You know, and we are all dicks at sometimes, but, you know, also just having a little word with each other if we're out of line, and trying to see we all do really super care about things. There's also issues there about oppression, and most of us are white people at the minute, but not just. But, you know, how does gender impact on these things? How does sexuality and race and class and all the rest of it affect how much involvement people can have in organising and dealing with that stuff? And then, as a, you know, when we're on actions, so some people might have seen we did actions where there were lock-ons, so people in arm tubes laid in roads and so on, ended up in the rain, some of them. So you keep people as comfortable as possible, make sure they've got food and water and cigarettes if that's the thing, and And then after they've been arrested, wanting to make sure that people are communicated with and feel supported through that process. I mean, we do our best around that. I really, you probably wrote this one, Roger, but I do really love a line in one of the documents we were sharing with people before the actions, which said all this stuff that we wanted to have in place. And we also asked affinity groups to have a wellbeing person, things like that. But we also put a line in that said, look, we're organising a rebellion, not a school trip. You know, you can't make this perfect for everybody, and there are inherent risks in what we're doing, and you can never tell how the legal system's going to behave, how the police are going to behave, how passers-by are going to behave. So doing our best to have a culture. And so maybe perhaps the last thing to say about that is one of our principles and values is no blaming and shaming. And it's really common, isn't it, to go, it's their fault and if only they had changed. And I think it's been actually a real joy to say to people, you have power here because you could do either support or you could yourself undertake acts of civil disobedience. And so that's where the power lies. That's part of the social theory of power, that it lies in the collective, not in the corporations or the government or so. And we give them the power by not getting our shit together as a collective. So, you know, what that means for a movement is that you need to get your community together, you need to make your connections, and you need to sort yourself out so that you come forwards with your power. So I think for me, the regenerative culture underpins part of the social theory of change.
Yeah, can I add to that?
Please.
Yeah, I think when people are talking about social and political change, people tend to over-focus on big macro sort of elements, you know, whether, you know, what the aims are and what have you. But the research I've done over the last 4 or 5 years sort of points in the direction that the little things are actually really important. And one of the supposed little things is how people treat each other. And it can't really be emphasized strong enough that being respectful towards each other and being welcoming towards people into the space you work on is a massive determinant of success or failure. And I mean, I think we all admit that we don't get it right all the time, but I think we've put a lot of work into doing that, and we've created a culture where people are expected to treat each other with respect. And once you've established that culture, then people tend to fall into it. And that's something that's quite unique, I think, in modern politics, because there is a tendency towards calling out and all the rest of it, and sort of aggressive moralism, as you might say.
And I think I see a difference in terms of like the level to which it seems like people are motivated by like their ego or like, you know, need for gratification and acknowledgement and personal success.
Yeah.
It seems like people are really working as a team.
Well, I think there's some fundamental shift which we're trying to encourage, which is that people shouldn't be involved in activism as a sort of something that you're getting from the movement, but having a more of a service orientation,
yes,
as you might call it. And there's a lot of evidence that people that do have a service orientation, whether that's a secular or religious orientation, tend to be a lot more psychologically sustainable and resilient, because they're looking at what I can give to the process rather than what the process can give to me. And that's definitely the way to go. And I think people that have been coming into Extinction Rebellion are very emotional, actually, in the sense that they suddenly found a community of people that has realized the extremity of the situation we're in. And that's created an atmosphere of dedicated service, I think, because this is a serious situation, isn't it? Beyond serious.
The most serious one could possibly imagine.
And I think you see that in people's eyes. And I mean, I've been in social movement organizing for 35 years on and off, and I've never seen anything like it. I genuinely haven't. I'm not just saying that. I genuinely have not seen anything like it. People coming up to me on numerous occasions saying, I want to give up my job. This is what I want to do. And this is highly significant, really. And that's why we've grown so quickly, because we've sort of opened the gates, really, to a collective desire to survive, really. It's as
Well
visceral
put.
as that.
Yes, yes.
You know, there's no point beating around the bush. You know, this is it. And so it's not, in a way, it's not surprising. I don't think it is a surprising, but it's a massive relief for me personally. And I'm sure many people on this call, we've all felt enormously isolated in thinking, what the hell is going on? Are we just going to allow this to carry on? And then suddenly it's like, suddenly everyone's coming out. It's almost like a religious awakening, but it sort of has some sort of existentialist religious element to it. And I'm not a particularly religious person, but I can sense that, and I'm not sure how to describe it, but it's something very powerful.
Totally. Okay, so could you guys describe what the last month has been like? October 31st, George Monbiot at Parliament issuing the declaration and just like, whoo, taking off.
So I'll start, and Roger can finish, because I guess in a way that's part of what we did as a organising team, was to tag team a bit in terms of energy. So I was quite heavily involved in getting the launch together on the 31st. We had more people there than we planned originally. I mean, we could tell it was going to be bigger as we were building towards it. And I think the George Monbiot article really helped that. And I will share something that, you know, with my spiritual practice, and it's just always feels a little bit odd because I do have a background in science, but I do pray and ask for support. And my experience has been in this last month that things have gone better than planned. And there's lots that can go wrong because when you're in Parliament Square, and I was part of Occupy Democracy there's lots and lots of rules. You're not supposed to have amplification. You're not supposed to have protests that haven't been somehow approved, or there's just lots of ways they can get rid of you, basically. And so you could have turned up to Parliament on the 31st and the whole thing be fenced off. So it was just a beautiful sunny day, and all the speeches happened, and we had to do the human microphone to ensure that Greta's voice was heard, and we planned to do that anyway for the declaration. And you could just feel this energy building, and obviously we had a bit of a plan that somebody might get on the road, and that we felt there had to be some kind of symbolic civil disobedience. But I was at the time, I just thought the whole lot can just walk to the road and get in it. That's clear, you know. And so rapidly just trying to make sure the rest of the team were okay with me initiating that. And, you know, just asked people if they were ready to rebel, and invited them to walk to the road slowly. And so that happened, and we had a democratic process in the road. So that really, if I'm honest, wasn't a plan. Not in that way. I mean, I sort of picture that might happen, but that was really exciting. Obviously, some people were willing to get arrested, but I'm pretty sure none of them have been charged. So I think that then that was a great launch, and then we had sort of 12 days to the start of the week of actions. And what we were testing there really were the affinity groups. So we've been going around the UK and supporting other people to give the talk about the Extinction Rebellion. And 65 affinity groups have formed as a result of that. But it's quite a different thing, you know, telling people about what the theory of change is, to getting them to come to London for a week and actually participate and have accommodation ready and know who these people are coming. So we didn't have 65 affinity groups joining us for the week of action, but we had some, and people will have seen that we did an event at the Department for Business, Energy, Innovation and Skills around fracking. That was another one. It wasn't planned to climb on a roof and do a bit of extra spray chalking, but we did what you'd call a mini escalation at the time. And there's something really about being quite mischievous that is okay, you know. Anyway, but
you got up on the top there
allegedly. Allegedly, I mean, they're still investigating, but
someone with a striking resemblance to Gail was up on the top ledge of the Department of Energy, spray painting and with a bullhorn. It was.
I've just fessed up in all these
something.
people that glued themselves to the building, but I didn't actually really fancy the glue, so I was just sort of faking it so I could nip off and have a wee and stuff like that. You know, I was sort of wandering off and then pretending to glue myself back on again. It was a bit funny, but. and it was getting a bit wet, so we moved people around from the rain. And so, I mean, it's quite a thing at the time. You're trying to work out what's for the best to do with people to you know, there were a lot of press there, and there is a bit of a game there where you're creating, you know, that part, what you've got to do is create the story. I mean, I love that moment recently where Roger was on Russia Today, and they're like, what's the point of doing all this? What does that achieve? And he goes, yeah, it gets you on Russia Today. You know, it's sort of like really obvious point. The press don't come out when you're stood there with a placard, you know. So there was actions at the Brazilian embassy. We had a queer party, and it's terrible what's happening in Brazil right now. And also outside DEFRA and outside the Houses of Parliament, there was a little bit of a focus on food shortages. So it was kind of, I guess it ended up being a bit of a build up to Rebellion Day 1, which was the big day that we had planned, where we had, it turned out, we think around 6,000 people came to block the 5 bridges, and we'd taken advice in advance about the implications for emergency services. So we did communicate with the police. We didn't get their permission or anything like that seems to be circulating, but what we did was to let them know, because if you give them a couple of days notice, they can plan alternative routes and so on. And again, those bridges went phenomenally well. Some funny stories from that. Lambeth Bridge seemed to be the main one for getting arrested. So Westminster Bridge, where I was, we were kind of sending people over. And at some point, it just had to stop because the police couldn't arrest any more people unless I think they just run out of coppers and vans for doing the arrests. And so that went really well. And I guess when we were originally planning this, we thought there might be repeat arrests and people ending up in jail on remand. So that's why the talk focuses quite a bit on the possibility of jail time. It became more clear that it was going to be people coming at different times, and that the energy of the 12th may lead to extra energy. So so while we were running the first week, plans were being made around swarming. So maybe Roger wants to talk about that on Rebellion Day 2.
Oh yeah, okay. Well, I'd like to say it was probably it's been probably the happiest 4 weeks of my life. There's a few moments that compete with it, but yeah, I was just on a bit of a flow really, and I just loved working with a team of people in the office. I've spent quite a lot of my life sort of building fast-growing ethical businesses, so it felt a little bit like that sort of atmosphere of constant growth, and I felt quite competent to deal with that because I've had experience of it before. And a lot of the stuff you don't see on the front line, you know, a lot of the reasons why things are successful because, you know, the office and the organisation is working properly. So that's what I wanted to focus upon. I sort of a real highlight, I think, a historic highlight, I think, was 6,000 people involved in civil disobedience on these bridges. I think that's the first time that's happened in an organised way in the UK for arguably several decades. So I think that sort of put a marker down really of how radical political change is going to happen in the Western world, you know, through mass participation, civil disobedience, which is organised and disciplined, as you might say. So and as people may know, yeah, we had several hundred people blocking the roads around London later in that week for 3 days, for something called swarming, which again hasn't been done in an organised way. It was done in a particular design to allow traffic through and not to do a continuous block. And obviously a lot of people were very upset about it, but a key sort of understanding of what needs to happen in order for radical social change to happen in an emergency is people do need to get upset because through emotion, people change. They don't change through information. So, those pictures of the swarming went around the world. And I think it's had a massive effect on people talking about the climate change sort of crisis for the first time in many ways. Yeah. So, and then on the Saturday, we had what you might call a finishing ceremony for this iteration of the rebellion, which was a funeral march to Buckingham Palace with a speech that Gail read out to the Queen, even though she's a Republican. But yeah, so so I feel like, the 4 weeks really created a bit of a debate in the UK, at least, and certainly around the world, on what the hell's going on. I think that's what we've been trying to say. What the hell's going on? You know, do we want to carry on this path or don't we? And in some ways that's a little bit like lacks concreteness, and some people criticize us for not having specific aims. But I think drawing back to the civil rights movement in the States and various other examples, one of the main things you have to do to bring about political change is get people talking about what sort of society they want to live in. You know, asking these big moral questions about the health of a society and a nation. And I think we've got to do that, and you do that through this disruptive activity. So now we're basically reorganizing ourselves, and as we'll say in the next bit of the talk, I think we're looking at bringing on a lot more people and a lot more organization.
And maybe to say a little bit more about the goals, because I can see Jacob, or however you say your name, Jake, asking about concrete demands, because Roger picked up on that slightly then. We mentioned in the talk some really concrete things that governments can do, carbon budgeting, rapid transition to renewable energies, changes to the transport system, and there is a lot of literature out there that can happen. There's some really cool stuff you can do, changing the agricultural systems to capture carbon and so on. But we've been really clear not to say what the blueprint is for the change. There are people out there that have had a go in the past, like Zero Carbon Britain. And the reason why we've decided to do that, I mean, I think there's quite a few different reasons, but as Roger said, it's supposed to be a democratic process. So the changes are so sweeping and so massive that for us to say it's this, this and this gives us too much power. And also I think it just gives an ability to focus on nitpicking about those demands and whichever one you pick to mention. I've noticed that if I mention regenerative agriculture, that, you know, Charles Eisenstein bigs up, and it sounds really great, but people who've got more of a vegan orientation in some cases think it's about animal agriculture and aren't so happy with it. Carbon taxes, some people are really celebrating, other people don't like, and so on. So I think the idea is for that debate to take place within a citizens' assembly rather than to take place while the movement's growing the political power, because the whole idea is to get the political power and then be able to have the conversation. But I think to reassure, first of all, there are interim demands in the sense that we do say the government, when they tell the truth, has to stop doing things that are inconsistent with that truth. So, you know, third runway at Heathrow and fracking and quite a few other things that they've been doing and cancelling and so on. There's a shopping list there already of things that we could do in the interim. But to make the massive change, that there are ideas out there, but it has to be a process that involves the people.
So so just looking at the time, I want to make sure to get to, I'm going to put all of the rest of my questions into one big question, and then take questions from the audience. And my big question is, as all of this incredibly exciting stuff on the ground was happening, and it was getting in the media and it was getting on social media, this is just big. And as part of that, we raised like £100,000 or 70,000 pounds during that month. And what is, and from the people on this call, again, thank you. And so what is Extinction Rebellion going to do with that money? And where do we go from here?
Yeah, I mean, it is being spent. I mean, it's quite expensive running a social movement. We did need to get an office in London. It's temporary, and I think we're keeping it on till the end of the month and probably going to find another one. These things are all up for discussion and being looked at the minute. We just literally had to have a place to gather the media team and people who were coming and going and getting materials together for the actions and so on. And it had to be central. So, I mean, I think that probably added up to about £5,000, I can't remember. We also have something, we've been calling it the compensatory budget, but we will call it the volunteer hardship budget. So we're trying to create this middle ground between the idea of an NGO where you have staff and salaries and the problems that come with that, where it's about somebody's career and it's about they're worried about whether they're going to pay for their mortgage or not, and so they're more bothered about the money than the movement, and the idea that you can run something on volunteer energy, which obviously, you know, I personally, I work as a consultant for NGOs, so I do fundraising and strategies and all that type of project management type of stuff, and I get a day rate for it. I just haven't been able to do that work this month at all. I just couldn't have found the energy or the time for it. So just being transparent about it. From this process that we've created internally, I asked for £750 for my time in London, which is, you know, something I could earn in a couple of days, to be honest, doing what I do, but not the 60-hour days that I was putting in. So I hope people can see it's just a way for some of us to pay our bills and to be able to deal with being in that case, being in London and so on.
It's an incredible bargain.
You are getting a real bargain, I tell you. But, you know, obviously it's not about that. It's just about everybody. For me, the money is about everybody contributes in the way that they can. And we do obviously foreground arrest as like a part of the civil disobedience risk that you take. But what we understand from the Erica Chenoweth data about social change is you need about 3.4% of the population or less, so about 2 million people in active participation. And one of the ways to be an active participant is to help fund the movement, you know, is to help fund the people that are at the heart of it, and all the leaflets and, you know, all the travel expenses and so on that people are incurring. So we've everything's in a budget and written up, and I'm meeting with the finance team next week, and actually what I really want us to do is just put everything online. We had some money from Lush funding, I think, being as open as possible so people can see where money goes is the way to go with this, because it's just things where, you know, then people can see.
Great.
Yeah, can I add to that?
Please.
Yeah, I mean, obviously so far on this call, we've been fairly self-congratulatory, maybe.
Well deserved.
However, I think we all need to gravely consider what needs to happen to actually succeed. And are we not close to succeeding at the moment? We've made a good start, but we have to be like ruthlessly honest with ourselves that what we're looking at here is a massive change. And that's not because we're ambitious, because objectively that's the situation. And what we're looking at is at a minimum, a structural change in government policy, and at the maximum, a complete transformation of the culture, the social structure of society, because we're in this massive emergency. And this isn't going to be brought about by a few thousand volunteers, if you see what I mean. It's a major, major undertaking, and it needs to be organised, because, as I think I said earlier in the session, it's easy enough to get 200,000 people onto the street, as you might say, but it's all going to end in tears unless it's done in a structured, organised and disciplined way, where it's democratic and accountable and non-violent. And all those things require organisation. And organisation is basically, you know, the hidden factor here. And organisation takes money, because people cannot work full time if they don't get some compensation. It's simple as that. Or at least you're not going to enable people who traditionally aren't able to work full time, you know, people that are poor or minorities and all the rest of it. So having, you know, an estimate is we probably need 5 to 10 times more money than we've got at the moment in order to carry things forward in an optimal way into a major international non-violent uprising event in April, which is what we're looking at.
500,000 to £1 million. That's what you think it would take? Yeah,
I think we're looking at, I mean, we're in this incredible situation I mean, I've been at the heart of the organizational center, as you might say, over the last 4 weeks. And literally like dozens of people are coming forward who want to work and give up the work they're doing. And some of them are fine, you know, they've got a partner who can pay for them, or they're semi-retired. And other people are young and they simply can't exist in London. I mean, everyone knows London is a massively expensive city to live in, unless they get £200 or £300 a week. You know, this isn't a lot of money, but it makes all the difference. And it's that generation which needs to lead this movement, and they need money. I mean, there's no two ways about that. It's just the way it is. So I think that's a major challenge. And I think we've got a game plan here to actually do what needs to be done. You know, at the end of the day, it's mass participation in civil disobedience. We need 30 to 50,000 people on the street in varying degrees of disobedience, as you might say. And then we might be in the ballpark of meeting with the government. And that's what we're looking at, right? It's not about just doing a protest and feeling good about ourselves. Those days are past. We've got to be focusing on winning. And that's going to take organisation, dedication, and the finance we need. That's my take.
Quite a pitch. Really, really great. I think perhaps we should take a minute and just applaud Roger and Gail and the broader XR too. I mean, that movement has it is a deep leadership bench, a lot of great people working in this organization. But so anyway, I want to just offer them a round of applause and heartfelt thanks from me, and I think everyone else on the call as well. So people are muted, but
we do that. Anyway.
So we're close to an hour here. I apologize. I wanted to get through those questions. I think we've covered a lot of great ground and painted a pretty good picture. But do people have some questions for Roger and Gail
there's one there from Jake asking about use of Slack. So Jake, we use a system called Basecamp for people who want to participate more directly as an organizer. And I think we've got a serious issue at the minute, but we were working very hard to sort it out. I mean, this movement started with 15 of us in a room in May in Bristol, planning how to go about things, and now there's at least 500 people involved in organizing this. We're in 131 groups across 22 countries and so on, and so you won't know what we're doing. Like, none of us quite know what's going off, and we have to rapidly restructure and decentralize, and we have a lot of plans around doing that. And essentially the key thing there is that if you're interested in XR, you ought to find your way in quickly to the bit of the movement that makes sense for you, that brings your skills forwards, that brings your passion forwards, in the right team, and you should be feeding into decision-making processes. We get in, the final thing I'll say on that is that we're going to be probably starting next weekend, but I'm not quite sure exactly. We're going to be getting some mass webinars led by a woman called Mickey Kashtan on how to decentralize structures, because it's kind of like part of our brain needs to decentralize, because it's very easy to think of sort of central command and control, and we want to move away from that. So there's some questions there coming up, but I'll leave you to facilitate.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to put these out, and you guys can kind of answer them perhaps together in an answer. Okay. So what are the plans for the next 3 months? Say more about the events of April and what's happening in the US. I feel like these are all kind of a piece.
Sure, yeah, and there's a bit where it says, is it intended to be a mass movement or more of a disruptive prelude? No, it's intended to be a mass movement. And actually the super exciting thing about the decentralization piece is the way I would say it's prefigurative for how societies could organize in a much more democratic way. So it's like a practice for the way that we need to structure going forward. So that's really exciting. So the plans for the next immediate weeks is to do this restructuring. We're taking a bit of and as part of that, if you're in any way involved, there'll be questionnaires coming out asking for feedback and so on. There'll be other opportunities for actions, but we want to make sure that people in their own cities feel that they've got the information that they can take action. So this recently in Stroud, there was a big cycle ride and a die-in at supermarkets and all the rest of us. Roger, do you want to say more about the vision for April? So it's April 15th, it's a week of action. So it's in the week rather than, on weekends, although I guess we'll move into the weekend.
Yeah, well, yeah, I just want to re-emphasize that we're in the process of restructuring ourselves. It might sound a little bit boring, but I think you should take this as how seriously we take the notion of democratic accountability and decentralization. That these things can't just be created at the click of a thumb, as it were, or a finger. They need some thinking about, and we need to get that right. Because as I said, it's very easy to build a mass movement, and it's very easy for a mass movement to fall apart. So we've got to get the structures right as we grow. So it might look like nothing much is happening, but again, the most important thing is actually happening at the moment, which is how to absorb 100, 200 people into an organization that used to have 20. And that, in many ways, can be quite painful as well, and it needs some sensitivity. Because you need to move people around and all the rest of it. So having said that, it does not mean that nothing is going to be happening. It means that we're basically creating a group to look at the strategic action sort of schedule between now and April, and that'll be happening in the next 7 days, I expect, as a meeting tomorrow. And I think, although, again, this is probably my personal prediction because it's going to be a group process, but I think we're probably looking at doing a number of national and international action days between now and April to build the resilience and knowledge in the movements around the world, because you can't go from zero to international uprising in one go, as you might say. So that's probably going to be happening. Might be something happening in the UK, UK-wide coordinated actions by different groups towards Christmas. There's an idea of having a slogan of only 12 Christmases left, related to the UN report. And then I think it's highly likely that there'll be international coordinated actions in January, February and March. And we set the date of the 15th of April, basically as the start of the second iteration, as it were, from the November one, on the basis that we build on the experience of what's happened this November. And again, this hasn't been finally decided, but I would expect that we're going to go forward with that. And although this sounds very ambitious, we're looking at an international uprising of non-violent civil disobedience of thousands of people in the major capitals around the Western world and maybe further afield. And as everyone knows, it has to be that ambitious because this has to be something that takes place internationally rather than just in one country. So yeah, it couldn't be more ambitious in a way, but that seems to be what we need to do at this stage in world development.
Yeah. I think to say, sorry, Roger, jumping in. Yeah. For April, I mean, we that was the plan for the International Rebellion, and we already had loads of events on the 31st, and on the 12th, and on the 17th. So I think this is going to get much bigger. And obviously, what we need to do is have a group discussion about what kinds of things people want to do. It's important to be disruptive for lots of reasons that we've talked about, and it's a really beautiful thing when the civil disobedience manifests, if you like, the vision that you're really holding. So there was a moment on the 12th when trees were carried into Parliament Square to dig and to plant trees, and there was this palpable kind of from people, and the police came to sort of stop it, and everybody stood up to stop them, and the trees came in and they were dug in. Of course, they were removed a few hours later, and when we got them back in the office, so maybe they'll get used again. But there's something about when the vision of what you're doing is what you're seeking to achieve is part of your disruption. So, for example, on the bridges when we were running people's assemblies, mass participatory democracies. So I think that would be part of what I'd be advocating for as part of the April actions. But actually, it won't be up to me to decide because I probably won't be in that team because we're restructuring, but I'll be letting people know what I think. So I hope that answers your question, Hilton. It's nice to have you on the call. And see, Samantha's asking about Milton Keynes. And I think that's an opportunity. So thanks for getting things going in Milton Keynes. That's awesome. Really appreciated. I hope that you're woven into the base camp situation, but I put my email in the chat, Samantha. If you're not, you can mail me. So you can be in touch with other local organisers and find out how they've done things. At the minute with the crowdfunder, we've said that 20% of it we'll set aside for international growth, so supporting that focus. And I think we could do with doing similar in the UK, but we haven't put that mechanism in place at the minute, and there is a need. We don't want to be centralised, but there is a need for the national focus to get some money at the moment. So I'll be meeting with the finance team soon. We have talked to some funders about having a separate pot that local groups could tap into. My experience of organising locally is it costs money, and I've just had to pay it and figure it out between the group. So just to get things going to a certain scale. We did get asked by Penguin to do a book. Actually, I'm not sure I should have said that, sorry. I just did. I don't know if that'll happen, but if it does, that kind of thing, if it might be happening, maybe that kind of money would go towards local groups. I mean, the key point here is everything shouldn't come to a centre. Money should be flowing around the system, and we just have to really keep thinking and learning about how best to do that. So there's no magic answer. You can certainly have access to logos, and probably would get sent a load of leaflets and stuff like that. But it generally is, it's quite a group bonding thing, to be honest, Samantha, to get people in a room painting banners up and reusing materials for that kind of thing.
So just to summarize what I think I hear you guys saying is that Extinction Rebellion, through this incredibly successful month of action, has reached a new level of engagement and support from around the country and around the world, and financial support. And it is kind of, absorbing that interest, restructuring, getting people into volunteer roles and, low compensated roles. And is gearing up for, I saw some kind of rumors on Facebook or whatever that's like, is XR slowing down or pausing or something? And it's just like, absolutely not. It is gearing up, getting stronger, getting bigger, and preparing for the next stage of the rebellion.
Absolutely. Although, we are letting people know that some of us are having a bit of a rest, that's part of the culture to have a rest. But there's a question there I'm noticing, Margaret, about useful to work with organisations like 350.org. I mean, some people may have seen that we did at the start of this campaign back in early October, we did an occupation of Greenpeace's officers. It was very friendly. We took cake and flowers, and everybody hid the horns from Roger so he couldn't go around blowing the horns as he wanted to, because we wanted to keep it really lovely. And we are having conversations with organisations. There's conversation with some of the bigger online platforms, even than 350.org. It's always an important balance to figure out how you have a relationship with any kind of NGOs so that there's not big compromises being asked for. And watch this space on that front. I think I shouldn't pre-announce things on here that haven't been agreed yet with everybody else. But we are definitely talking to other organisations.
I think
more tricky than you think, actually, quite often.
Yeah, I think this is maybe an area we've missed out on in describing what needs to happen here. Is how I see it is Extinction Rebellion is basically a catalyst which is going to transform democratic political culture in the Western world, at least. And that sounds quite grand, but someone has to do this, and someone has to bring these people together and shake them up and say, we're in a crisis, and we either work together and get ourselves out of it, or we're all going to go down. And whether that's through fascism or through climate crisis, or some, horrific sort of combination of the two. So this is a very serious sort of proposition that we're putting to some of the more like NGOs, which are, I think a lot of the people in the NGOs know this as well. I mean, a lot of people know what's coming. And I think this opens up a really interesting space in progressive culture in the countries we're in. For the first time for a generation or two is to basically create a united front, as it were, people working together on a common agenda. And I've been personally really surprised by how open some of the people have been at Greenpeace and Avaz and various other organisations to the notion that, yes, we need to have mass participation in civil disobedience, and that's going to be the future, and we've run out of the other options. So as far as XR is concerned, I'm very much hoping that we will be open to and trusting towards these organisations, and that will be reciprocated. And, if some of these big organisations work with us, they're perfectly capable of publicising to hundreds and thousands or even millions of people the need to get involved in this sort of process. And that could lead to, 50 or 100,000 people being on the street in April. And that's what we need, of course.
So Farhana comments, it would be great if everyone on the call can reach out to groups like 350 and others in their networks, which is, and at COP24, which is a great, I mean, that's, I feel like that's very much in the spirit of Extinction Rebellion, right? Is, decentralize, kind of take it on yourself. Yes, absolutely, we need to be influencing these organizations. It's like, so let's do it. Let's, everybody take part in that pressure campaign and invitation campaign. But okay, so I want to wrap this up, because as I said, I think this should be the first of many donor calls, not necessarily all of them with Roger and Gail, though I hope that you guys will come back. But the idea that donors can get a closer look at Extinction Rebellion, see up close what they're supporting, and hopefully decide, this is an organization that is really worth my resources and investment. This is really a good use of my funds. So I hope that everybody feels like they learned, and that that they can make a more informed decision about supporting Extinction Rebellion. And okay, so why don't Roger and Gail, if you guys want to make some closing statements, and we'll wrap it up. Or maybe it could be inspired perhaps by the XR system of checking out.
You going, Gail?
No. I do need to check out my boyfriend's mum's in hospital. My little boy's having his 13th birthday. But I absolutely love talking about this stuff. I'm sort of can't shut me up, as people might have noticed. So I would love to do it again, and hope that there's more questions and so on. So yeah, let's do this again soon. Yeah,
I mean, I'd really like to give a heartfelt thanks to the people that have provided money so far, and I can't say how important that has been in order to provide financial security for the people that are going to make this big change in their lives. And if there's anyone that wants to talk to me personally about or Gail, I expect as well personally, about a donation they may wish to give and want to have more information, it's certainly a major priority for me. And I think if we can get the way I see it, to be honest, is if you can get these 100 people that are making major changes in their life to come and work. See,
I'm having trouble hearing you, Roger. Is it
right.
breaking up? Okay, yeah.
You just suddenly went a bit Dalek-y when you were making your final grand
my
pitch.
final grand pitch. Yeah.
You're back okay now, so that's cool.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah,
State
it's okay.
surveillance and interference.
Yeah, so this is what I think. I think it's the most important thing in the history of humanity, and
oh no,
and for better or worse, and maybe we haven't got it all right, but you know, we're first on the block on this in terms of international mobilization, and we need these 100 people. How I see it is we need these 200 people to be working flat out, and we need the money to support them. So if anyone's out there can help with that, I can't exaggerate how important, you know, say how important that is. So thank you very much. Look forward to hearing from people.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Margaret.